These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. In Colorado in 1900, 15-year-old Preston Porter Jr. reads a Bible as a rope leads him toward a public killing by a crowd. Accounts say police threatened his father and brother, and he confessed after 4 days in custody, even though no court ever tried him. At the Nevada test site in 1953, this test house with mannequins stood 1.2 kilometers from the center of the nuclear test called Annie. The fake family was thrown into broken furniture so researchers could record how the shockwave and heat moved through an ordinary room. In the Soviet Union in the 1920s, state political directorate officers arrest a home alcohol distiller in his room while one points a pistol at him. After the Civil War, the state pushed a strict alcohol monopoly, so illegal spirits could mean prison. In 1954, a full-size mechanical giant squid sits in a studio tank during filming of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Its rubber body and cable-driven tentacles were built for close shots, and the crew had to haul, dry, and reset the heavy prop after each take. In Normandy, France, in 1944, a French dairymaid leads her cows through a meadow scattered with 1,000-pound Royal Air Force bomb casings. Many were dropped from the air and did not explode. Dr. William Thomas Corlett at Western Reserve University in Cleveland photographed a man after he recovered from smallpox in the early 1900s. The deep facial scars stayed for life. In Sosnowiec, occupied Poland, in autumn 1939, German occupiers gathered a crowd as Polish men faced a public punishment. The scene was staged to scare the city into obedience in the first weeks of the occupation. In Budapest, Hungary, in November 1956, a residential building lies collapsed after Soviet forces entered the city to end the uprising. Whole streets became rubble during days of tank and artillery fire, leaving families without homes overnight. In December 1937 in Nanjing, a Japanese officer aims a pistol at a Buddhist monk and a local farmer forced to kneel. On April 28, 1945, the United States Navy aircraft carrier Franklin steams up the East River to the New York Navy Yard with her flight deck torn open, with the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan behind her. Weeks earlier in the Pacific, she survived a catastrophic deck fire after an airstrike. Near Moscow in 1942, Soviet paratroopers lie in the snow as a sabotage team sets off a charge on a railway behind German lines. One broken track could freeze troop trains and fuel deliveries for hours, so these raids aimed at one precise hit and a fast escape. In May 1945, Ilyushin Il-2 ground attack planes fly low over a broken bridge in Berlin. It shows the final days of the war in Europe when Soviet pilots targeted roads and crossings to cut movement through the city. Birmingham, Alabama, United States, 1963. Police officers detained Martin Luther King Jr. during a street march. Soon after, he wrote the letter from Birmingham jail, a text that pushed the civil rights movement into the national spotlight. Northern Ireland, 1973. A British Army soldier hides in a garden with a rifle while a resident pushes a lawnmower only meters away. The image shows how the conflict slipped into ordinary yards, with daily chores and armed patrols sharing the same quiet space. Uganda, 1971. Government officials kneel and raise their hands to swear loyalty after Idi Amin took power in a military takeover. The pledge came right after President Milton Obote was removed while he was abroad. Former Emperor Puyi, the last ruler of Imperial China, threads a needle while held at the Fuxian Management Center in the People's Republic of China in the 1950s. He first became emperor as a child in 1908, but after the Second World War he was pardoned in 1959. A ship lays a giant smokescreen, turning the sea into a white wall that can hide entire convoys from distant eyes. Naval smoke screens were often made by injecting oil into hot exhaust to create thick smoke, and in minutes they could make the horizon simply vanish. On July 24, 1969, Neil Armstrong is hoisted from the Pacific on a sling and brought to a helicopter after the Apollo 11 splashdown. He and the crew wore isolation suits and were flown to the aircraft carrier Hornet for quarantine. Warsaw, 1946. A girl stands on a balcony and looks out over block after block of flattened ruins. After the war, people lived among mountains of brick and twisted metal while the city was rebuilt almost from scratch. In December 1900, the three keepers of Island Moor Lighthouse in the Flannan Isles, Scotland, were missing when the relief ship arrived and found the station empty. And the last log entries mentioned severe weather, even though nearby observers later reported calmer conditions. In Sweden in 1876, 14-year-old Carolina Olsson in the village of Ökno was reported to fall into a sleep that lasted almost continuously until 1908. Doctors and newspapers documented the case for decades, but no clear cause was ever proven. On July 1, 2018, 11 members of the Chundawat family were found dead in their home in Barauri, Delhi, India. Investigators found a staged, ritual-like scene and notebooks describing strict family rules. Ruby Crane walks hand in hand with a soldier who lost his sight at St. Dunstan's Rehabilitation Center in Brighton, Sussex, during World War I. Her father worked there as head gardener, and her habit of guiding veterans around the grounds was so famous that she appeared in the charity's 1915 to 1916 annual report. On April 8, 1945, prisoners in Buchenwald sent a secret radio message asking General George Patton's Third Army for help. The reply said, "Hold out, rushing to your aid," and the camp was reached 3 days later. In May 1942, the fleet oiler Neosho refuels the United States Navy aircraft carrier Yorktown while heavy seas smash over the fueling lines. This at-sea refueling was so risky that one snapped hose or sudden roll could spill fuel and turn the deck into a trap in seconds. In an early 20th century Russian imperial photo, the hands in the background look oddly shaped, with finger lengths and joints that do not line up like real anatomy. Later, analysts noted sharp edges near the wrist and uneven skin tone, suggesting heavy retouching. Cairo, Egypt, March 1919. Egyptian women joined street demonstrations after British authorities exiled Saad Zaghloul and other Wafd leaders. Their public protests became a turning point that helped lead to the end of the British Protectorate in 1922. During the Boxer Rebellion in China, around 1900, 5 prisoners kneel on a shoreline while armed guards and a crowd watch. Public punishments like this were staged to frighten entire towns, and the camera turned that fear into a permanent record. In 1985, in Kunduz, Afghanistan, Estonian singer Anne Vesky visited the Soviet 370th Separate Anti-Tank Artillery Battalion. She posed at a sandbag guard post beside a mounted gun during the unit's official visit day. New York City, 1914. Postal workers load mail canisters into a pneumatic tube system powered by compressed air inside the post office. Paris built about 440 kilometers of tubes and capsules could reach about 60 kilometers per hour, while New York used containers up to 9 kilograms. A British sailor stands beside the ice-covered light cruiser Belfast while she escorts an Arctic convoy to the Soviet Union during the Second World War. Sea spray froze into heavy layers that could destabilize a ship, so crews hacked ice away for hours in extreme cold. In 1918, frontline nurses pose wearing gas masks over their uniforms. The masks protected the lungs and eyes from poison gas, turning medical workers into figures that barely looked human. In 1949, riders watch a movie from horseback at an outdoor cinema, with hitching posts instead of parked cars. Horseback drive-ins appeared in some rural areas where people still arrived in the saddle and not in automobiles. Port of Riga, 1983. Thousands of new Soviet cars are parked in tight rows on the docks before being loaded onto ships for export. Baltic ports like this were a main gateway for selling Lada and other models abroad to bring in valuable foreign currency. At the Paris World Fair in 1900, The loaner Porsche stunned visitors as an early front-wheel drive hybrid car. A gasoline engine charged batteries that powered electric motors, and the design even won a Grand Prix but never became a mass product. London, England, 1935. Bernard Tussaud holds freshly made wax heads of Emperor Haile Selassie and Italian leader Benito Mussolini for Madame Tussauds. The display was timed for the Ethiopia crisis, when both men were dominating newspaper front pages across Europe. East Berlin, 1989. Tens of thousands gather in a mass protest against the German Democratic Republic government on a central city square. Within weeks, the Berlin Wall opened and the regime's control collapsed in front of the world's cameras. Begichevka, Ryazan Governorate, 1892. Leo Tolstoy sits with aides compiling lists of peasants who needed food during the 1891 to 1892 famine. From this estate, he helped organize hundreds of soup kitchens and child milk stations across the region. A technician stands beside a full-size weight and balance mock-up of the first Soviet nuclear test device, Soviet Union, 1949. The real device was tested on August 29, 1949, proving the Soviet Union could match the United States in nuclear technology. Before most homes had natural gas or central heating, vendors delivered kerosene and heating oil in barrels and poured it into household containers for stoves and lamps. The shell drum shows how early oil brands reached everyday streets long before modern fuel stations became common. United States, 1936. The WLW Crosley Superpower radio receiver used 37 vacuum tubes to drive 75 watts of sound through 6 speakers, including an 18-inch unit. It sold for $750, more than a new Ford car at about $625. Kuwait City, August 2, 1990. Iraqi army tanks roll through downtown streets hours after Iraq entered Kuwait. The move triggered a global crisis. United Nations demands to leave, and a rapid buildup of foreign forces in the Gulf. United States, 1890s. Railway workers load huge piles of American bison bones gathered on the prairie for shipment. The bones were sold for fertilizer and glue after bison herds had been reduced from tens of millions to a tiny remnant by the late 1800s. 1939. A baby lies in a pram wearing a tag that reads, "Influenza precaution, please do not kiss me." Parents use signs like this to stop adults from spreading respiratory infections through close contact. Frankfurt am Main, June 5, 1945. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov attends the ceremony where General Dwight Eisenhower receives the Order of Victory. The Order of Victory was the Soviet Union's highest military award and was given only a few dozen times, making Eisenhower one of the rare foreign recipients. Made around 1870, this perfect protector is a ring with a tiny firing mechanism built into the top. It survives in its original case with a small screwdriver and 3mm cartridges, and it later appeared in the Cherney's auction catalog. Atlantic City, February 18, 1928. Racer Ray Keech poses with the White Triplex, a land speed record car powered by 3 aircraft engines for a total of 36 cylinders. Built for pure straight-line speed, it was so hard to control that a later high-speed run ended in a wreck. Brighton, England, 1897. Magnus Volk's Daddy Longlegs. Electric railway ran on rails laid on the seabed between 2 piers. A single tall-legged railcar carried passengers above the water on 4 high pylons. 1971. Physicist Stephen Hawking sits in his wheelchair at the edge of the sea during a beach trip. By this time, he was already living with motor neuron disease, yet his most famous scientific work was still ahead. Around 1950 in New York City, firefighter trainees climb hook ladders from window to window on a training tower. The drill copied real apartment blocks, where upper floors had to be reached fast when stairwells were blocked by smoke. These are Humphrey Bogart's platform shoes used on the set of Casablanca in 1942. Off-camera, he wore them so he would not look shorter than Ingrid Bergman in close scenes. Japan, 1914. A pilot sits on the exposed frame of an early biplane with only simple controls and wires all around him. Early flyers faced wind, oil spray, and almost no instruments, so every flight depended on eyesight and nerve. On March 18, 1929, an Indigenous man photographs another man on the north coast of Queensland, Australia, using a box camera. At the time, most images of Indigenous Australians were made by outsiders, so a local person behind the lens was unusual. Tolmachevo Airport near Novosibirsk, 1957. Passenger planes park on a muddy field, and a bus crawls over wooden planks to reach them. It was one of the city's 2 passenger airports then, with no paved apron, so every boarding and loading run fought the mud. New York City, 1946. Actresses picket outside Enterprise Productions, holding signs that demand corsets be removed from the show Bel Ami. Their message was simple and public. Corsets hurt and restricted breathing, and they refused to wear them for the stage. Lake Ilmen, Soviet Union, 1930. Fishermen pose with a gigantic pike they caught in the lake. Contemporary reports called it the biggest pike ever recorded in Russia, so large it took 3 men to hold it. India, 1948. People climb electric poles to see Mahatma Gandhi's funeral procession above a sea of mourners. His cremation drew enormous crowds just days after he was killed on January 30, 1948. Soviet Union, late 1980s. Shoppers crush toward a shop entrance as a tense line turns into shoving. Chronic shortages and ration-style buying made queues for basics so desperate that tempers broke in public. Wembley Stadium, April 23, 1927. Police officers literally crawl across packed spectators to reach their posts before the Cardiff City versus Arsenal Football Association Cup final. The crowd was so dense that the pitch edge and aisles vanished. Anchorage, Alaska, March 28, 1964. A city street splits and collapses during the Great Alaska Earthquake. The quake reached magnitude 9.2, the strongest ever recorded in the United States, and it triggered landslides and a Pacific-wide tsunami. In 1929, Real Madrid and Barcelona meet on a mud-soaked field during the first La Liga season. What became a global rivalry began here with players slipping in ankle-deep muck. United States, 1955. An ironworker walks a bare steel beam high above the street while building the Soconi mobile headquarters. On many projects then, safety harness rules were minimal, so a single slip could end a career in 1 second. In the 1940s and 1950s, the cone-shaped bullet bra was designed to create a sharp, pointed silhouette under sweaters and fitted jackets. This style spread through Hollywood costumes and mass-market lingerie. In 1955, British strongwoman Joan Rhodes holds a back bridge while a man stands on her torso during a stage stunt. She became famous for strength acts built on precise balance and body control, where the performer literally worked as the platform. Kenya, 1976. An aerial photo shows a vast elephant herd spread across the savanna like moving dots. In the years that followed, many scenes like this became rare as the ivory trade and illegal hunting surged. In the 1980s, Elspeth Beard became the first English woman to ride a motorcycle around the world, using a BMW R60/6 like the one shown here. She later became an architect and published a memoir about the journey. January 1985. A Brazilian Navy submariner holds a Fabrique Nationale Model 49 on the submarine while sailors swim beside it. The weapon was carried to keep sharks away during open water breaks. Moscow, 1961. Scientists at the Soviet Academy of Sciences present the space dog Strelka and her puppies at a press conference. Strelka had returned alive from orbit on August 19, 1960, and one puppy, Pushinka, was later sent to the White House. Scientists measure a rare giant squid laid out on a tarpaulin, with its long feeding tentacles stretched to full length. Specimens like this prove the animal can reach over 10 meters from fin to tentacle tips and helped explain old sea monster stories. Egypt, 1857, the Colossi of Memnon, two massive seated statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, stand on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes. They were carved in the 14th century before Christ and once guarded the entrance to his mortuary temple. Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic, 1972. A wedding convoy drives through a dusty village street with passengers riding on the back of a truck. A slogan painted on the tailgate says, "A healthy family is the key to happiness." Cuba, 1910. A lector sits above cigar rollers and reads newspapers aloud while they work. These paid readers spread politics and novels through the factory, and the brand name Monte Cristo was later taken from a story often read at the benches. On December 26, 1965, a small plane made an emergency landing on the George Washington Bridge after engine trouble. The aircraft stopped on the roadway between traffic lanes, turning one of the world's busiest bridges into an instant runway. Paris, 1871. Shattered streets after the fall of the Paris Commune, with blocks of buildings burned out and walls torn open. The Bloody Week in May ended the uprising and left parts of the city looking like a battlefield. In the Soviet Union in 1940, the KV-220 experimental heavy tank sits behind a screened barrier to hide it from workers without permission. It used a longer hull with an extra road wheel and was built to test thicker armor. Los Angeles, 1932. A car is lifted on a hydraulic service rack outside a neighborhood garage. Quick lube systems like Alamite let mechanics pump grease into dozens of fittings because early cars needed frequent chassis lubrication. Moscow, November 15, 1941. Civilians build street barricades from timber and rubble as German forces approach the city. Anti-tank obstacles and trenches were thrown up across Moscow in weeks. Germany, 1944, a consolidated B-24H Liberator from the 793rd Bomb Squadron, 465th Bomb Group, 15th Air Force trails, smoke after anti-aircraft fire hits it. California, April 1924. Charlie Chaplin lies in the snow beside multiple movie cameras while filming the gold rush. The film was released in 1925 and later became one of his most famous works. Moscow, 1979. This multi-story building was moved to a new position instead of being demolished, sliding on rails while workers controlled its slow shift. Such relocations kept residents and historic facades in place, while the city widened roads and rebuilt blocks around them. Late 1960s. Engineer Jack Kilby shows a handheld calculator and the tiny electronic parts that made it possible. Kilby invented the integrated circuit at Texas Instruments in 1958 and later shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for that breakthrough. On September 18, 1983, Kiss appeared on music television without their trademark makeup for the first time. The reveal promoted their album Lick It Up and made their faces front-page news overnight. University of Michigan researchers, 1949, ran a self-test by drinking measured spirits and recording times and lab readings. The chalkboard tracks dose and minutes, showing an early effort to measure how one drink changes coordination and judgment. 1970. Alexander Lukashenko is photographed in winter gear during his service in the Soviet border troops. He later became the first president of Belarus in 1994's. United States, 1892. An early rubber-soled canvas sneaker advertisement from the U.S. Rubber Company, the kind of shoe that would later be sold under the Keds name. The quiet rubber sole inspired the nickname Sneakers because the wearer could move without loud footsteps. Karelian Isthmus, 1940. A Soviet commander examines a crate of Finnish incendiary bottles taken from the front. One bottle shows the taped ignition match, a built-in trigger meant to light the mixture on impact. Austria, March 3, 1945. B-17, Flying Fortress bombers push through anti-aircraft bursts, leaving long white contrails. Each B-17 carried up to 13 machine guns and a crew of 10, but the flak still tore holes through formations in seconds. Frenchman Flat, Nevada, April 15, 1955. Operation Teapot Shot Met sends a towering dust and smoke column about 200 meters high above the test range. The photo shows official observers at a viewing area watching the cloud climb into a classic mushroom shape within minutes. Grand Central Terminal, New York City, 1991. Activists hang a banner saying acquired immune deficiency syndrome is taking a life every 8 minutes. They chose the main commuter hall so the arrival boards would frame the warning like a countdown. Soviet Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov speaks at a Moscow briefing in 1983, denying that Soviet Union air defense caused the loss of a South Korean Boeing 747 near Sakhalin Island. The wall chart traces the route like a crime map. Water used to stop a building fire froze into thick ice and giant icicles, sealing windows and stairways. United States, 1920, where the rescue ladders are still standing, but the walls look turned to glass. Fans crowd the roof of Dallymount Park during a match in Dublin, Ireland, 1985. One wrong step meant a long fall into the packed stands below. London switchboard staff practice French pronunciation during a training session, 1920. An instructor with a megaphone has them tilt their heads back and roll the R sound for clearer cross-channel calls. A mass rally of the industrial workers of the world fills a New York City street in 1914, with thousands packed shoulder to shoulder in straw boater hats. One loudspeaker on a small platform tries to command a sea of faces that seems too big to count. Swedish politician Olof Palme takes a break on a Stockholm building site in 1968, sitting shoulder to shoulder with a construction worker. The suit, the work shirt, and the shared bottle turn a power visit into a blunt-class snapshot. American inventor H.L. Bowden poses with his deep sea diving suit fitted with 1,000-watt shoulder lamps, 15 August 1931. The rigid metal shell and hinged boots were built to take crushing pressure, turning the diver into a walking machine on the seafloor. Adolf Hitler shakes hands with a Hitler Youth boy on his 56th birthday, 20 April 1945, Berlin, Germany. Made in the city's final days, the photo shows children still being staged for propaganda as Soviet forces closed in. The French trench crossbow, nicknamed the Grasshopper, was used in 1915 to loft small payloads over trench walls without revealing the shooter. Cranked back like a giant bow, it could throw a bolt about 100 meters. In 1974, Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu introduced a presidential scepter to make his office look like a royal throne. The prop was widely mocked at home and abroad, but it still became a symbol of his growing personality cult. German Junkers Stuka dive bomber with a painted grin on its nose, used heavily in the early years of the Second World War. In a steep dive, its sirens screamed to frighten people below before the bombs dropped. Actor and producer Douglas Fairbanks stands on the set of Robin Hood in 1922, while director Alan Dwan uses a giant speaking horn to direct the crew and extras. The silent epic relied on huge outdoor sets and crowd scenes. Heavy cruiser USS Salt Lake City rolls over and sinks on May 25, 1948, after being used as a target ship. After surviving 2 atomic test blasts at Bikini Atoll in 1946, she was pounded for 5 hours by warships and carrier aircraft. Thousands of miners swarmed the Serra Pelada open pit in Brazil in 1986, passing sacks of ore hand to hand up near vertical mud walls. The Naked Mountain gold rush turned the mine into a human anthill where a single slip could send bodies and gold sliding together. Nicola Romeo, head of Alfa Romeo, poses at Monza with his drivers Giorgio Remini and Enzo Ferrari during the Italian Grand Prix in 1923. Ferrari was still a racing driver 6 years before he founded Scuderia Ferrari in 1929. In Seoul in September 1950, a United States Marine rips apart a portrait of Joseph Stalin during the Korean War. One city changes hands, and yesterday's leader becomes paper on the ground. Japanese and German pilots and aircraft engineers pose beside a Messerschmitt Bf 109E4 in Imperial Japan, 1941. Only 3 were shipped to Japan for testing in June and July 1941, and this one already wears Japanese camouflage and roundel marks. In 1952, contestants in a best figure contest wore papier-mâché masks so judges would not be swayed by faces. Lined up on the ground with their legs raised, the scene looked more like a strange inspection line than a holiday show. The Dynasphere was a one-wheel car built in England in 1932, with the driver and engine sitting inside the rolling wheel. It moved by small rollers pushing the rim, but steering and stopping were so awkward that it never became a real road vehicle. This traditional Dutch women's hairstyle was photographed in 1943 and is meant to look like long hair from the front. From the side and back, you see the twist. Long side locks and a smooth top layer, while the back is cut very short under the cap. Workers lift an 18th century wooden water pipe made from a bored-out log during street digging in a city block. Before iron pipes became common, these hollow trunks were joined end-to-end with metal rings, hiding a whole water network under the pavement. A Soviet aircraft looks down on Stalingrad, now Volgograd, during October and November 1942. From this height, the city becomes a gray grid of broken blocks and torn streets, showing how close the battle had pushed to the river. Guards Red Army soldier Kabibulin of the 26th Guards, Red Banner Rifle Division, shows how he fired a Maxim heavy machine gun from his hands on the Western Front, September 23, 1942. The weapon was designed for a mount, but he kept it running alone when his crew was gone. Finnish soldiers take a break in Viborg in 1941 and play harmonicas on a rubble-strewn street. For a moment, the city sounds like a small band instead of a front line. Madison Square Garden rises in steel over Midtown Manhattan during construction in New York City, 1966. The arena was built above Pennsylvania Station, so trains and crowds moved underneath, while this huge round crown took shape. This German epidemic doctor mask from around 1700 uses a long beak and round glass eye holes to turn the wearer into a human bird. The beak was packed with herbs and spices to soften the air, making the mask look like protection and warning at the same time. Inside a Soviet military aircraft in the 1940s, an air crewman sits strapped in among oxygen bottles, cables, and crowded instruments. The tight metal maze around him shows how flying meant managing a whole machine by hand, not just steering. In Helsinki, around 1920, people stroll across the winter ice straight toward a docked icebreaker. The ship looks like a floating wall, and the walkers seem tiny, as if the harbor itself became a public street for one cold day. Berlin officials study a giant-scale model of the sports complex planned for the 11th Summer Olympic Games in the early 1930s. From above, the main stadium sits like an eye in the center, hinting how carefully the whole city was being staged for the world. Men of the North Staffordshire Regiment marched toward Baku in August 1918 in the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic. Britain hurried a small force across Persia to help hold the city and its oil fields as old empires fell apart. At a public event in Japan, a Mickey Mouse mascot leans close to the Japanese emperor, mixing cartoon cheer with strict palace rules. He led the country through the Second World War and the upheaval of 1945, so this friendly grin looks almost unreal. The foundation of the main building of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is laid in 1972 in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Cranes and workers pour the first concrete, long before the name Chernobyl became known worldwide. Police officers support Rosie Ruiz just after she crossed the Boston Marathon finish line on April 21, 1980. She was soon removed from the results after officials concluded she did not complete the full course. A German student holds a one-man street protest in support of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, calling out to the crowd behind him. The photo captures how one voice could try to pull a whole square into a new movement. In Stalingrad in 1942, a symphony orchestra musician carries a double bass away from a damaged theater, photographed by Emanuel Evzerikin. The empty street and the oversized instrument make the scene feel like music is trying to escape the city. Two gas balloons tangled during the Coupe Gordon-Bennett balloon race in Brussels, Belgium in 1923. One pilot ends up perched on the sagging balloon skin while another balloon floats above, like a silent aerial trap. Student nurses attend an anatomy lesson on the rooftop of St. James's Hospital in London in 1958. A full skeleton model stands beside the chalkboard in open air, turning the city skyline into their classroom. On Kamchatka. In 1988, the Soviet TES-3 mobile power station rolled on tank-like tracks to bring electricity to remote sites. Its generator and small reactor were split into heavy transport units, making a full power plant that could move when needed. In the Netherlands in 1931, a married couple hauls a cargo barge along a canal using a tow line and their own strength. Before engines became common on small barges, this slow, human tugboat work kept freight moving from town to town. In Normandy in 1947, a French woman stands on the wet sand and looks out at the rusting hulls left from the Allied landing. The sea kept the evidence in place for years, turning broken ships into a silent shoreline memorial. At Sugarcrest Donuts in Portland, Oregon, 1918, bakers use long tongs to lift fresh donuts onto huge cooling tables. The endless rows of identical rings show how early factory baking turned a small treat into a city-scale operation. A builder stands beside his small house trailer near Camp Livingston in Alexandria, Louisiana, in December 1940. Built on a car chassis with curtains and a stove, it was a mobile home made for a boomtown that could move overnight. In Durban in December 1899, Winston Churchill speaks to locals soon after slipping away from Boer captivity. The 25-year-old reporter became famous overnight, and this moment helped launch the career that later led him to guide Britain in the Second World War. In Moscow, during the August 1991 political crisis, citizens lined up trolleybuses across Novinsky Boulevard to block the road. The jam of electric buses became a homemade barricade as crowds moved to defend the Russian White House nearby. Berlin, May 1945. A heavy air defense gun sits among shattered streets with the Reichstag in the background. The city is quiet now, but the broken skyline shows how much vanished in only a few weeks. A worker on the rising Empire State Building points across the gap and appears to touch the top of the nearby Chrysler Building, New York City, 1930. The forced perspective turns a risky job into a visual trick, with the skyline hanging in thin air behind him. A Chinese family poses for a studio-style portrait in the 1960s or 1970s, from adults to very young children. Several hold long rifles, a chilling detail that shows how daily life and readiness could blend into one photograph. The French battleship Jean Bart lies badly damaged in Casablanca on November 16, 1942, after an Allied attack during the North Africa landings. Rushed out of Saint-Nazaire in June 1940 while still unfinished. A German officer under guard stands beside a British soldier at Newhaven in East Sussex, England, on October 5, 1941. The quiet dock setting makes the moment feel almost ordinary, even as the uniforms show two worlds colliding on the same gangway. Uzbekistan, 1976. Schoolgirls in crisp uniforms walk past a figure wrapped head to toe in traditional cloth. Behind them, power lines and heavy industry fade into dust, making the contrast feel like 2 centuries sharing one road. A tiny electric car drives through Tokyo on December 21, 1947, watched by a traffic officer standing on a small platform. This microcar could reach about 48 kilometers per hour, a clever answer to fuel shortages and crowded streets after the war. A Chechen wedding portrait from the 1990s pairs a white dress and veil with men in combat-style clothing. The contrast makes the celebration feel like a family photo taken in a tense time. A childhood photo captioned as Jacqueline Bouvier shows her in a Native American-style costume beside a horse, dated December 8, 1939. Years later, she became Jacqueline Kennedy, linking this playful dress-up scene to the future White House. In Moscow in August 1991, protesters wave and shout at an armored vehicle crew beside barricades lit by fire. The scene captures the moment the street tried to make the machines back away. United States Army General George Patton poses with a captured German flintlock rifle after the capture of Frankfurt, Germany on March 29, 1945. The antique weapon in his hands looks like a museum piece, but it was found in a city that had just changed hands. Children in England around 1940 jump rope while wearing gas masks, turning a playground game into a drill. The image is unsettling because the rope and the masks belong to completely different worlds, yet they share the same moment. Australian soldiers feed a thorny devil lizard in 1941, sharing scraps at a rough field table. The tiny spiked reptile looks like a desert myth brought to life, calm among men in uniform. On August 31, 1920, the first Soviet-built Type M tank, based on the French Renault FT, rolled out of a factory. It was named Comrade Lenin, turning a brand-new machine into a moving symbol. Gendarmenmarkt in Berlin, 1857, with the French cathedral and the concert house standing almost unchanged. The wagons and empty square make it feel like the city is holding its breath just long enough for the camera. In London in 1943, the Royal Albert Hall was draped with Soviet symbols for a Red Army Day celebration. It came just weeks after the Battle of Stalingrad ended, when British cities from Bristol to Manchester held rallies that felt like a shared turning point. In 1963, actress Claudia Cardinale feeds spaghetti to stray cats beside the Pantheon in Rome. The scene looks staged until you notice the cats crowding in like they recognize her. Wrestling at the 1960 Olympic Games in Rome was staged inside a vast ancient ruin, turning a stone arch into a living arena. Thousands watched from the steps, and the cheers echoed in a place built for crowds long before modern sport. Armenians in Egypt crowd the docks of Alexandria in 1947 as they depart for Soviet Armenia on a packed ship. The banners and suitcases capture a rare moment when a whole community tried to restart its life in one voyage. 8-year-old Rosa Maria Godziewska served as a nurse in a field hospital during the Warsaw Uprising in Warsaw in 1944. Her Red Cross armband and steady smile show how even children were pulled into emergency work in the ruined city. Primorsky Krai, 1960. A worker sits inside the open mouth of a huge whale on a processing ship deck. The scale is so extreme that the jaw becomes a room, showing the Soviet whale industry up close. Persian Jewish women pose in the 1880s wearing layered dresses, heavy jewelry, and face veils. The covered mouths and direct eyes make the portrait feel both formal and guarded, like you are seeing a private world through a keyhole. In 1922, Arthur Conan Doyle meets Eiley Norwood, the actor who played Sherlock Holmes 47 times on film. Norwood's Silent Holmes became a model for later movies, and many historians still rank him as the closest match to Doyle's original character. In 1925, Venezuelan Red Cross volunteers pose in a bright clinic room where every window carries the same bold cross. Groups like this trained civilians in first aid and organized emergency aid long before modern ambulance networks reached most towns. This is Ronald Reagan in an enemy German uniform, filmed for the 1942 movie Desperate Journey. Only a few decades later, he became the 40th President of the United States, after spending the 1940s in the United States Army Air Force's film unit, making training and information reels. In 1885 in Philadelphia, Anandibai Joshi from India, K. Okami from Japan, and Sabat M. Islam from Syria posed as new medical graduates. They became pioneers for women in medicine across 3 continents after studying at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. Vietnam, 1961. A young woman from a local resistance group poses with field gear during the early phase of the conflict. Many women served as couriers, medics, and scouts, carrying supplies and messages along hidden rural routes. London, 1970. Playboy promotional models greet Hugh Hefner as his private jet with tailcode N950PB arrives. The aircraft was known as the Big Bunny, and its luxury trips helped push the brand into global headlines. In the late 1800s, some American papers nicknamed bulldog-type dogs nursemaid dogs after stage studio photos showed them sitting calmly beside children. Later writers repeated the label so much that many experts call it more legend than history. British actress Shirley Ann Field appears at the Miss Great Britain contest in 1955, wearing number 22 in front of a packed stadium. Within a decade, she turned into a swinging London film face, later appearing in Alfie and Bedazzled. A studio portrait from 1925 shows a young Arab woman in a face veil, wearing layers of heavy silver amulets. In many regions, these pendants worked like wearable savings and a silent ID, signaling family status and origin at a glance. In 1957 America, this Dodge shows off a trunk so wide that 5 women can sit inside it, like a photo booth. Huge trunks were a sales trick of the era, built for long road trips when families packed spare tires, picnic gear, and full-size suitcases. In 1956, newly married Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III drew a street-sized crowd during a simple shopping walk in Lausanne, Switzerland. That same year, she left Hollywood after her final film, High Society, turning everyday errands into global headline moments. Atlantic City, 1968, activists at the Miss America pageant dropped braids, false eyelashes, and high heels into a freedom trash can to reject beauty rules. The photos went global and sparked the bra-burning legend, even though most accounts say nothing was actually burned. In 1957, a white cat named George walks along the top of a Sydney Harbor Bridge pylon as the city drops away below. Opened in 1932, the bridge rises about 134 meters above the harbor, turning this calm stroll into a skyline-sized illusion. World War I ace Count Francesco Baracca poses beside his Spad S7, marked with the black prancing horse on the fuselage. After his death, the symbol was given to Enzo Ferrari's team and became the famous Ferrari badge. In 1944, schoolboys in Chasovanskoye village in Leningrad Oblast practiced basic defense drills with long wooden mock staffs outside their school. The lesson shows how daily life in the Volkhov area pushed even children to learn coordination and readiness as a normal skill. October 1938, a top German official awards the Order of the German Eagle to a world-famous American aviator. The medal was meant for foreign guests, but this photo later became a lasting headline because the pilot's public views on United States involvement in Europe were closely watched. Berlin, 1930. An anti-fascist crowd marches under a warning banner that says a Nazi victory would push Germany toward civil war. The photo captures how openly people argued in the streets before the 1933 power shift ended most public opposition. 1944. United States General Omar Bradley is photographed with a small nose bandage, an unplanned detail he disliked showing in public. War photographer Robert Capa captured moments like this to make famous leaders look real and close, not staged. In 1944, British commandos share tea and biscuits with a German serviceman taken into custody during a fast coastal operation. The simple brew-up was a real field tool because a hot cup could steady nerves and open mouths in minutes. Ernest Hemingway in Africa during a safari, 1953 to 1954, at the peak of his global fame. Within months, he survived 2 plane accidents, and later in 1954, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature. John Jacob Astor IV, worth about $85 million in 1912, was the richest passenger aboard the Titanic. He also wrote a science fiction novel called A Journey in Other Worlds, and he was returning from a honeymoon with Madeleine Force when that voyage became world news. In 1945, members of the Danish resistance posed just before Denmark was freed from German occupation. Their secret networks moved messages, disrupted transport lines, and helped ferry most Danish Jews to Sweden in 1943. London, 1952. A young couple in gauze masks walks through the Great Smog when coal smoke and trapped cold air turned the city into a gray tunnel. The shock pushed new clean air laws and modern pollution tracking because the same dirty air flooded homes, buses, and hospitals. Around 1914, Harry Houdini is lowered into New York Bay inside a packing crate weighted with 600 pounds. He made these timed escape challenges famous by letting witnesses inspect the ropes and locks first, so the ordinary box felt like an impossible riddle. On January 15, 1919, a giant molasses tank in Boston burst and sent a thick wave through the North End streets. The weeks-long cleanup and the famous court case helped push stricter inspection and construction rules for industrial tanks. In 1960, miners pose underground with a proud scoreboard, 108 yards in 4.5 days, about 99 meters of new tunnel. That pace is almost exactly 1 yard per hour for 108 hours, with every meter needing cutting, hauling, and roof support as they advanced. 1937. The Rex Theater sign shows that even movie nights were split by race in many United States towns. This practice in public places was later banned by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1959 in the United States, runner Hubert Pernackevi reaches the finish line while barely able to stay upright. The photo became a famous warning that a race can overwhelm the body in seconds, even when the clock says you won. Wuhan, 1931. Floodwater turns a main street into a canal, and the traffic becomes boats gliding between shop signs. That year, China faced the 1931 floods, among the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded, reshaping river control plans for decades. Harlem, New York City, 1975. Kids keep a basketball game going as a nearby building pours thick smoke into the sky. During the 1970s, New York lost huge numbers of apartments to neglect and insurance fraud, so street courts often sat beside sudden evacuations and emergency ladders. In 1942, the battleship Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya was disguised with netting, boards, and laundry lines, so it looked like ordinary rooftops in blockaded Leningrad. The ship was a former Gangat-class dreadnought launched in 1911,